Inner dialogues are usually running in the back of your head non-stop, and it may drain energy out of you, and at some point you may not even be conscious anymore, it is running in the background. They are quite often translating some internal conflict, internal wound or fear or anger about something that you may have trouble to articulate consciously, or you may have defense mechanisms preventing you from actually seeing what the dialogue is about, or the big fear that is being hidden by those constant voices looping and looping and looping in circles in the back of your head. The main way to get out of this evil cycle that is just looping around on itself again and again and just torturing you from the inside, the main way to get out of that is to break the cycle, because it is usually just turning around without trying to find any solution. So you are just complaining and complaining and complaining, or you hear complaints, or you hear criticism and fearful thoughts, but it is usually never going into a solution. It is about describing the problem, but never really looking for a solution or going toward a helpful solution. So the idea with the techniques I'm going to show you here is to break the cycle, break that loop that is constantly turning around on itself, break that loop once and for all, and attach it to another direction that will drive you to much more healthy thoughts and hopeful thoughts about yourself and about your future. The first main technique is to change your inner voice in a very specific way. My question is going to be, when you have elaborated, figured out what is a kind of inner dialogue or inner voice you feel like is really negative in your head, or something you don't really like when you hear it in the back of your head, or some conversations you have in your head. Once you have identified something specific like this, I would like you to define how would you explain this if you had to describe it to a 10-year-old kid to reassure him. So if you had a very young kid, let's say your little brother or some cousin or just some young child you see in school, and that child is having the problem you are having, translated by this inner dialogue running in their head, or if it is something too advanced and that the child could not live himself, maybe the child would be scared or anxious about what's happening because he's witnessing that in yourself, in your life. And your goal is to explain, either through your own inner dialogue, or you might even write it down, explain what it is about, this problem you have, explain what it is exactly as if you were explaining it to a young child who is about 9-10-year-old, and you need to simplify and be reassuring enough for him or her to understand and to feel safe in your presence by you teaching, explaining this thing. When you do that, it's actually going to rewire your inner voice with a tonality that matches the words of self-love, of self-assurance, of assertiveness, of being caring for somebody else, caring to each other. When you use all the topic with that kind of voice inside your head, it is actually going to make you see another perspective, something maybe less criticizing toward yourself, maybe something less draining, or your mind could maybe start to fire off ideas you didn't have before. The second big technique to rewire your inner dialogue, change your inner voice, is to identify. You may just write down randomly things that pop up in your head when you are criticizing yourself, or maybe when you are overly anxious about something that might happen in your future or may not happen, and you are so scared about it. You're like, what if it does happen? And you're always stressing about it. You keep thinking about it at night non-stop. It is never shutting down, and you want to write down a few words about that, a few sentences. It doesn't need to be super clear, detailed, because I know sometimes those inner dialogues are pretty confusing and you don't really know where to start with. But just a few sentences about what's happening in your head, and notice the most negative words. If the most negative words is "I feel like a piece of shit," or "I'm never satisfied," or "people don't like me," "people always criticize me," just the most really heavy, loaded negative term, and you're just going to go on the website thesaurus.com and you want to look for alternative synonyms. For example, if the main word you are criticizing yourself with, or the main negative concept or term hidden within your text, your paragraph, is blaming. I'm blaming myself. Something like, I'm never satisfied about myself, I would like to be further in life, or I haven't done the right things in the past and now I'm a failure. Whatever it is. Let's say blaming is the main concept here you are dealing with, and you are going to look for the direct opposite. What is an acronym? I'm not sure if it is said in English like this, but some opposite word. The direct opposite of blaming, what it is. Is it reassurance? Is it being compassionate? Compassion in itself, the noun compassion. Just look for the direct opposite and then look on thesaurus.com what are synonyms of that word. And then you are going to rewire your whole paragraph by calling that thing you are dealing with this new synonym, with words from those new concepts, those new positive alternative to this concept. And you are going to notice how does it shift the whole perspective on what you're dealing with. If the whole problem is about blaming yourself and the direct opposite is compassion, being compassionate, or any other synonyms you find on the website, you are going to notice what would this text be about if I was compassionate about myself? Or if I was compassionate, if I had compassion toward the person I am dealing with in my head when I think about him or her, or the people that I don't like, or the situation I don't like, if I was compassionate about it. Compassionate because it is one of the direct opposites of blaming, but whatever the negative term you are dealing with, if it is anger, I am frustrated, I am super scared and anxious, I feel guilty because I didn't make that happen. Guilty, same thing, the opposite of guilty might be also compassionate, or it might be indulgence. Which other words, which other kinder, more positive terms do you have for indulgence or guilty, blaming, not being satisfied about yourself? And same thing, you're going to rewire this whole paragraph, reframe it through the eyes of what if I had indulgence toward myself? How would I answer this? How would I reframe this? How would I think about this whole situation right now? And the last one is to write down those 5 magical questions. I would recommend to have them written down somewhere on your wall, somewhere where you are going to see them pretty often, because otherwise you may just forget about them, or you may not use them at the right time. Usually what happens is that we don't use the things we are supposed to use on the mindset tools, the meditation, the positive inner dialogue. We usually don't use those things at the moment we need to use them. So having those 5 questions outlined somewhere in your office, in your bedroom, somewhere in your living room, or on the fridge, just somewhere where your mind, your subliminal mind, is going to be exposed to them as often and as frequently as possible. And I would like you to answer them as many times as possible whenever you are endlessly worrying or thinking about the thing you are dissatisfied with, or the thing you are scared of, the thing you feel guilty about, or angry about, or frustrated toward. Just answer those questions in relation with the main topic that is being dealt with in your head. So the first one, if there was a positive end to this discussion, how would it end now? Basically, you want to turn, as I said, this whole inner dialogue is usually a loop turning around in circles and never ending. So the question is, if there was an end, a positive end. This is a whole reframing and shifting the time frames in your head. A bit of timeline therapy here, if we were really pushing this idea further. If there could be an end to this negative discussion, what would that end be? What would the outcome of that discussion be? Again, so often people just run around in circles, the things they don't like about themselves or about their life. What if there was an end? What is the outcome? What is the final edit of this discussion, basically? Next one, what is it that I am not saying? Since we are into auditory terms here, the auditory world, listening to things, hearing things in the background, in the back of your head, talking to yourself, then what is it that I am not saying? The thing I would like to pinpoint usually with that question is, what is something you are not admitting right now? There is always something, for example, we know we are kind of not completely right about it, but we don't really want to admit it out of ego, out of wanting to be the person who is right all the time, or not wanting to admit somebody else might be right somehow this time. So what is it that I am not saying? With the positive intention in mind, what is it that I am not saying that could end or lead to a positive outcome in this discussion again? Number 3, how can I accelerate to the end of this discussion? So again, if the first one doesn't work, if you don't find any clear outcome about this negative patterns you are running in your head, then how could you accelerate? All this language is about shifting the submodalities and the perceptual filters in your head so that you change your thinking patterns. How can I accelerate to the end of this discussion? Specifically, if you hear something in your head talking super fast, then how could I even accelerate this even more up to the point where it is the end? Because we have said everything that had to be said. Now, let's go to something new. Let's go to something else. Once and for all, we have dealt with that. It is done. Now it's time to get to something new. Number 4, if what I'm scared of was easy to solve, what would it look like? What would it look like if it was the easiest thing in the world to solve? Quite often we are overcomplexifying things. We are overcomplexifying out of fear, out of scarcity mindset, because we think we don't have enough, or we will never have enough, or we don't have enough time, we don't have enough money, we don't have this or that, enough love, enough people loving us. So many scarcity mindset. And what if the thing I'm scared of was easy to solve right now? What would it look like? What could be an easy solution to this problem? And of course, you won't always have an answer to this one, but just having it printed somewhere in front of you day and night non-stop, it is going to train your brain to actually find answers for this question. And number 5, 1 month from now, what steps could I have taken to solve this issue? So getting back into the idea of some timeline therapy, some changing the time frames. 1 month from now, the classic idea about this is a double time distortion. So you go into the future looking at what you have already achieved. So something that looks really challenging right now and you don't know how you're going to get it done. Look past that. Let's say you have already done it. It's done. It is there. You have it in your life. Right now, as you're listening, it's done. Look back on today. Look back on what happened so far. What are the important, very important steps you have taken up to that point, up to the point where you have received the thing you were in such a challenge about, that you were so much worried about because you didn't know how to get it. If you have already gotten it, what have been the main steps? And of course you won't figure out consciously probably all the steps, but you will naturally figure out 1 or 2 main things you actually need to do, which 99% of the time comes down to take more action, say the one thing to this one person that you don't like anymore, or just admit something about yourself that you don't want to admit. It's pretty much always going to come down to those very, very extremely simple things. But people overcomplexify and they try to find 1,000 different explanations, ways, methods, theories, psychological theories in the books, the psychoanalysis, figuring out their personality types. Yeah, all those things, if they do help you, go study them. But in the end, I can assure you it's really coming down to something really simple. Either you don't take enough action or you are blaming yourself for something that is just coming out of guilt, but guilt is just a feeling. So when you get down in trance and do some hypnotic healing, you can get rid of it. Or it's just anxiety about the future because you're putting the expectations way too high or way too low, and then you are bored of your life. Or you just have criticism you're not dealing with. It's always very simple. Once you get out of this, you just have in mind insight of the next action to take, and then everything gets easier and easier as life goes by.